I've always cared about animals. As I became increasingly aware of what a terrible place this world is for so many animals, I found that the only way that I could manage the sadness that came with that was knowing that I was doing something to, in some way, help alleviate the suffering.
Hello, kind viewers, and welcome to Animal World, Our Co-Inhabitants. On today's program, we continue our interview with Dr. Melanie Joy, a social psychologist, university professor, and vegan who has spent nearly a decade studying the psychology behind the belief system she calls carnism, which conditions us to eat some animals but not others. Dr. Joy holds a master's degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, USA, and a PhD in psychology from Saybrook Graduate School, USA, and is currently a professor at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, USA. She has written extensively on psychology, animal advocacy, and social justice, and is the leading expert on the ideology behind meat production and consumption. In her latest book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, An Introduction to Carnism, Dr. Joy examines the inconsistent, illogical mental and emotional links between humans and animals.
I start out my book with a scenario. If you imagine that you go to a dinner party and you sit down and the host comes out and serves you a meat stew, and as you're eating, you ask her for the recipe, and she says, sure, I'd be happy to give you the recipe. You start out with 3 pounds of golden retriever, well marinated, and most people at this point stop and they're a little shocked and they're very uncomfortable with the idea of eating golden retriever or dogs. At least in the western part of the world, people are extremely uncomfortable with this. And this is an example of carnism. Carnism is the belief system in which it's considered ethical to eat certain animals. It's absurd that what was once delicious suddenly became disgusting. Nothing changed. Nothing with the meat itself actually changed. It was the same meat, it smelled the same, it felt the same, it tasted the same. What changed was a person's perception of what they were eating. So we love dogs and we eat cows for no reason other than the fact that we live in a dominant system in this part of the world that teaches us that dogs are for loving and cows are for eating. That's an example of carnism.
What accounts for the prevalence of this cruel, contradictory belief system? Why is it that people lovingly care for some kinds of animals and heartlessly consume the flesh of others?
The path of least resistance is the path of the norm. It's the path we take, or the thoughts, feelings, behaviors that we engage in, essentially when we're on autopilot. So when we're born into a system like carnism, the path of least resistance is to eat meat and to not question it. So this is why it's easier to conform to the carnistic norm, the carnistic majority. You can find food products more easily. You don't have to worry about being ostracized from friends and family. Your life is, in fact, easier in many ways if you choose to eat meat than if you choose to go against the norm and not eat meat. But paths of least resistance also block us from recognizing that, number one, these are not paths of our own choosing, and number two, there are, in fact, alternative paths that we can follow. My book will help people to recognize that what we've been taught to think of as free will or free choice when it comes to eating meat is not, in fact, reflective of a behavior that's freely chosen. Free choice requires awareness.
Dr. Joy believes that carnism impedes people's evolution to a higher level of consciousness.
In most spiritual disciplines around the world, and in many schools of thought in psychology, the goal of human evolution or human development is integration. Integration means becoming more connected with oneself, becoming more connected with others, becoming more connected with your true feelings, with your empathy, becoming more conscious, becoming more aware. Integration requires the very opposite qualities and behaviors that carnism requires. Carnism is based on secrecy and deception and coercion and violence. Integration requires honesty and transparency, authenticity, empathy, compassion, and ultimately nonviolence. So it makes sense that as we evolve consciously, we will evolve away from a system in which it's considered appropriate to eat somebody simply because we like the way their body tastes. My hope is that by exposing the system of carnism and helping people recognize the very specific mechanisms it uses, people can free their minds and they can make more informed choices as citizens and consumers and think for themselves and get in touch with what their deeper value system is.
When we return, we'll learn more from Dr. Melanie Joy about the psychology behind why people love some animals and eat others. Please stay tuned to Supreme Master Television.
I'm Dr. Melanie Joy. I'm the author of Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, An Introduction to Carnism. I teach at a public university. I like to look at my teaching as a vehicle for raising consciousness about critical social issues that affect human beings, as well as non-human beings.
Welcome back to Animal World, Our Co-Inhabitants, as we continue our interview with the thoughtful Dr. Melanie Joy. As a professor of psychology and sociology, Dr. Joy challenges her students to carefully consider their underlying assumptions and views about our animal co-inhabitants.
Each semester, I try to dedicate one class to attitudes toward animals, and I have my students do an exercise. I write on the board dog and pig. And I have my students write a list of words that describe dogs, and then a list of words that describe pigs. And in general, the list of words that describe dogs are much more flattering than the list that describe pigs. Usually people will say dogs are cute, they're fuzzy, they're friendly, they're loyal, they're lovable, and pigs are dirty, disgusting, fat, and ugly. Then I start asking them questions. Why do you say this about dogs, and why do you say this about pigs? Where did this information come from? And eventually what we discover is that the information that people have received about pigs came from media. It did not come from direct personal experience in general, and reflects stereotypical attitudes toward pigs. Many of my students have had close personal relationships with dogs, and so they're much more aware of the fact that dogs have their own personalities. But I ask them ultimately, well, do you think pigs like dogs feel? And they say, of course they do. Do you think pigs have emotions? Yes. Do you think pigs are sentient in that they can feel pleasure and pain? Well, yes, of course they do. Then I ask my students, well, why do we eat pigs? And they say, ultimately, well, it's just the way things are. And this is a great example of the way carnism works. We often spend more time thinking about what kind of toothpaste to buy than we do about what kind of animals we eat and why, when our choices in the United States alone as consumers drive an industry that kills 10 billion land animals per year. And it's striking how we can make these choices over and over and over again, sometimes multiple times a day. We make these choices without realizing that we're making these choices because it's just the way things are.
Dr. Joy says that those who make the cruel, inhumane choice to eat the flesh of their fellow sentient beings develop a condition called cognitive moral dissonance, and describes 3 ways in which the condition can be alleviated.
Cognitive moral dissonance is the internal discomfort, moral discomfort a person feels when their values and their behaviors are incongruent or in conflict. Most people's value system does not include supporting extensive, intensive, and unnecessary violence toward animals. And yet most people eat meat. So this contradiction causes an internal moral discomfort. In order to mitigate or assuage, alleviate this dissonance, we have 3 choices. We can either change our behaviors. In this case, it would mean to stop eating animals. We could change our values. In this case, it would mean we would start valuing gratuitous violence toward other sentient beings, and most people are not going to do that. Or we can change our perception of our behaviors. And it's around this third option that carnism is shaped.
Meat eating not only leads to untold suffering and violent deaths for billions of helpless animals, but also causes severe psychological damage to those employed in the meat industry.
There's a difficult to read but very powerful book called Slaughterhouse by Gail Eisnitz, and she investigated a number of different slaughterhouses and wrote about it. She interviewed people who worked in meatpacking plants as well. And apart from her work, there's been people like Eric Schlosser who have documented the conditions that people work in when they work in meatpacking plants and slaughterhouses. The psychological impact for people who work in an industry that requires them to exist in a death-saturated environment day in and day out in the killing fields is tremendous. Slaughterhouse workers have high rates of developing addiction. Violent behavior is not uncommon toward the animals and toward other humans. It really kind of begs the question of what kind of industry requires people to develop antisocial behaviors, violent behaviors, as a norm. Witnessing violence traumatizes people, whether that's violence toward humans or violence toward animals.
In closing, Dr. Joy has these thoughts about how each of us can make the world a better place.
I think people really need to follow their own hearts. The best thing any of us could do, in my opinion, is to become more integrated ourselves, to become more conscious, more emotionally mature ourselves. And as Gandhi said, become the change you wish to see in the world. Be veg, go green, and save the planet.
Many thanks to Dr. Melanie Joy for sharing her compassion, courage, and insights, and for promoting a loving, consistent way of life that promotes high moral values, respects our animal friends, and preserves the environment. May her words inspire countless others to live and love the vegan lifestyle. For more information on Dr. Melanie Joy, please visit www.melaniejoy.org. Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, an introduction to carnism, is available at Amazon.com. Thank you for joining us for Animal World, Our Co-Inhabitants. Coming up next on Supreme Master Television is enlightening entertainment following noteworthy news. May we all live each day in wisdom and love.
For more details, please see www.suprememastertv.com/AW.